Hello everyone and welcome to Climate Australia. My name is Constable and I am your host. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I am broadcasting to you from today. I am here on the land of the Turrbal and Yugara people, just to the south of the land of the Gubbi Gubbi people, so I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present, and also acknowledge the ongoing relationship that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people across the many nations that make up what we now call Australia have with the land, sea and sky, and of course storytelling, which is one of our favourite things to touch on when it comes to climate problems and solutions. Today, our episode is all about podcasters declare. Who are they? What do they want? What are they declaring? They are going to be joining us, Mark and Sean, who are the co-founders. So first up, I will start by inviting Mark Spencer, and I will tell you a little bit about Mark. Hi, Mark.
Hello, Lee.
So Mark Spencer is the co-founder and publisher of the Climactic Collective, and we've done a previous episode with Mark about Climactic Collective, so check that out. This is a network of shows that engage with climate crisis and various different perspectives. He's also figuring out how to produce, promote and manage shows and stuff that matters, and he's one of the co-founders of Podcasters Declare. And our other guest today is Sean Marsh. So I'll tell you a little bit about Sean. Sean is an ethical business designer and strategist who has built himself a reputation as an unapologetically purpose-driven creative. So he's led the design of a bunch of awesome stuff, including 2019's Not Business as Usual Climate Strike. I understand he's also behind the beautiful branding of Podcasters Declare that you'll see in the screen around us. Welcome, Sean.
Hey, thank you so much for having us.
I'm so excited to have you both here. Sorry, just letting out a little shriek of excitement. So let's start at the beginning. So as I mentioned, we've had an episode before with you, Mark. So I might start with you, Sean. Sure. Design and climate. Can you explain to everyone what your kind of story is and how you came to this sort of podcaster climate community?
Yeah, it's a long one, so I'll try and keep it short. I've always sort of just followed my nose when it comes to things I know I need to just do in life, and that's why I guess I see myself as purpose-driven, and I'll morph myself into whatever I need to be to do those things. And so I've done design, I've done marketing, I've done public speaking, and one of those gigs I did for BCAG, talking about the links between superannuation and fossil fuels. Mark recorded the audio, put it up as a podcast, and I tracked this guy down because I'd never been on a podcast before, and then a great friendship blossomed, and he then encouraged me to start my own podcast. Turned out pretty good. I'm pretty chuffed with it, and I haven't looked back since. And then I'm a designer by trade. I probably haven't mentioned that. I'm a creative strategist, creative director at an impact agency in the city. So I move pixels around and try and make the world a better place, basically.
Love it. And this is a great project for you both to bring together your knowledge and your networks. So how did you both coming up with and starting Podcasters Declare? Mark, maybe you want to tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, and thanks so much for having me back, Lee. It always feels so good to be back on a show. I've said it a couple of times now. I've been a repeat guest. It's like going from like the hot seat to like a comfortable old leather armchair. It's all broken in.
Part of the family now.
Exactly, it's part of the furniture. Yeah. So I'll tell it in brief, and it is like there's a really good kind of handoff moment where there was an idea that was had, and then the idea wasn't at the right time, and then it went into dormancy for years, and then it got picked up at the right time after meeting the right people, and all the stars aligned on it. So the original germ of the idea was 2019. I'd started Climactic as just an interview show where I was talking to people about the climate crisis in Earth Day, April 22nd, 2018. So we're coming up here on 3 years of Climactic, which is pretty cool. But after I launched it, I was like, what is this show? What category is it? How does it fit within the current schema of organizing podcasts? And it didn't really seem like it fit anywhere. So I went with natural sciences because I was talking to scientists. I was talking about plants and natural systems, but also about like your budget and what super you had and what car you drove and everything. And so nothing was really the right fit. So quite quickly after starting the show, I heard that, hey, great opportunity. Apple Podcasts is changing its podcast directory and they're adding some new categories, because what was going on at that time was true crime was getting pretty big, and history. There's a lot of history shows, and there's a lot of audio fiction shows. We're kind of coming into this golden era of podcasting where the radio drama was coming back, and it wasn't just hipsters listening to BBC from the 50s, like the Chronicles of Narnia radio drama.
Listening to a radio play.
Yeah, exactly. Like on a gramophone. Like it's back. Like podcasting lets people do that in their bedrooms, and it's awesome. It's sick. So 3 categories Apple added in to represent the fact that they had gaps in their directory. And at the time, I asked people at Apple. I got contacts, and I was able to say, hey, would you guys add a climate category at the same time? Because I'm a climate show, and there isn't a climate space, and I don't fit anywhere. And they said, well, that's a great idea. We certainly consider it, but we haven't been asked to do it. And there doesn't seem to be the demand here in 2019.
Okay.
Therefore, we can't be seen to add it ourselves. Like it seemed in 2019, especially, like that would have been activism, corporate activism on the part of Apple.
Weird.
Yeah. So it didn't happen, right? So we got those 3 categories added, and then I was like, okay, well, that's it. It would still be great to have it happen sometime. And then fast forward a few years, I meet this guy, Sean. I'd been like super enthused by the school strikes and then seeing Not Business as Usual, which you'll hear more about maybe. And I was like, what this needs is kind of a movement around it of podcasters and podcast listeners saying, hey, Apple, we love you, but you kind of overlooked something. And here's an area you can maybe add to. And I took the idea to Sean.
And it's interesting, like I can definitely relate to that whole thing about trying to categorize a show that centers on climate. I think because I come from a show before that was more like a science TV show that was very science. And if we did touch on climate, it was climate science. I even have to break that down when I talk to people about Climate Australia. They're like, oh, so it's about climate science. And I'm like, well, also there's policymakers, there's economists, there's health professionals, there's community members, activists, there's people in different types of media and entertainment. And it's so interdisciplinary, it touches everything, including design, obviously. So yeah, it fits everything and nothing at the same time.
Currently nothing. Sure. Yes, everything and nothing, although we could fix the nothing.
Yes,
an intersectional issue that doesn't intersect in media at all.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so Sean, what was your kind of response when this sort of thing was brought to you by Mark?
So the seed was planted when Mark graciously offered some hosting space for my podcast, and every couple of days I'd be like, Mark, how do I add a tag to this, or how do I upload this, or is this going to go to Spotify, or what do I do? And it was at the category moment when I was like, I spent 10 minutes scrolling up and down through. I'm like, none of these are, because I wanted mine to be a very specifically climate focused show, and all of the things that intersect with that, whatever that might be. And I just couldn't put it under anything. I actually forget what I put it under. It's probably society and culture or something maybe. But, so it bugged me, and I don't like those things, and I can't just tie something off. And then Mark and I would meet up and we go for a walk on the beach because we used to live close to each other. And he brought his laptop one time. And I was like, oh, business time, hey? And he said, here's an idea. There's no climate category. I saw the work you did with Not Business as Usual. Can we do something like that for this?
Yeah.
And I was like, yep, yes, we can. We have to do this.
And a recent episode of Climate Australia that some of you watching may have seen was Comms Declare, that obviously had picked up on these same intersects that you're talking about, Sean, particularly in PR and marketing and media and things like that. So it is good to see these conversations starting. Just wanted to say, Sarah on the Simpatico chat says, welcome Sean and welcome back Mark. Lots of exclamation marks and one of these emojis. Obviously, you've got fans. Yeah, so now that you've had that idea, how did you've heard that Apple Podcasts is obviously receptive to putting new categories out there when there's enough of a call for it. So your next step is to somehow make there be enough groundswell for them to listen, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you even start?
So right now there's a problem in the space of discoverability of climate shows. And like we said, Sean's show, which is about climate first and foremost, is marked to society and culture. The chances of someone looking for a show like his and happening to look in society and culture is quite low. So we figured, what if we just find a way to list out all the shows that would use the climate category if it exists? Mm-hmm. And so that was the initial idea for it. And it was, in hindsight, a bit constricted, and it was like bottlenecked at the point where I just wanted to reach out to the podcast community, the wide, broad, varied, fractured, isolated. Many podcasters are quite isolated, making stuff in their bedrooms kind of thing. That whole community, I wanted to say, hey, look, if there was a climate category and you can list up to 3 categories for your show, it doesn't have to be your main category. It can be a secondary or a tertiary category. Would you use this if it exists? And we've got an answer to that now. We've got close to 300 podcasts that have signed this as the podcast. Mm-hmm. And they are comedy shows and they are technology shows. And you get a host of, climate shows, but then ones that we talk about climate quite a bit on our other category show. We would mm-hmm. use this because that's how our audience would find us, our potential audience. That's kind of phase 1. Sean, do you mind if I pass over to you to talk about because that was all I had in mind. It was just if we build it, they'll come, and then Apple will see it, and then everything will be great. And I was so cocky at the start because I thought this is a slam dunk idea. There's precedent here. Apple has done this before. All they have to do is hear about people, their customers, their users want this, and they'll make it. But then we kind of realized maybe we needed a bit more of a groundswell, and it became phase 2.
Yeah. So I think to piggyback off that, I worked on Not Business as Usual. And for those who don't know what that is, it was there's a campaign set up by my previous employer in an ethical superannuation company to figure out how we could get more people to the school strike events. Mm-hmm. And it didn't take us long to figure out that majority of people are workers, and the reason those workers can't go is because of work. And so we were like, let's see if we can get employers, companies, organizations to say, we pledge to let you go, join the strike without penalty.
Yeah.
We'll give you a paid day off or a long lunch or whatever it might be. Might even Canva, for example, they got involved and they had free templates to make posters. We ended up I think it was 3,000 signatures. And it was global exposure, and it was we were in American media, Australian media, UK.
I just had that 3,000 companies, right? That signed.
3,000 companies. Sorry, yes.
Wow, yeah.
So Camp America, Atlassian, Keep Cup, you name it. The list, the website,
and then Jerry's.
Yeah, and so it was within a 2-week period that this happened. Enormous, astronomical growth, and so I've got experience in something like this, and I knew that we could apply that lens to this problem. Mm-hmm. And this issue with Podcasters Declare is so much simpler than anything I've ever worked on before. It is an idea that everyone who sees it says, why isn't this a thing? And then they realize, wait, environment and sustainability isn't even a category either. Like, what's going on here? And so I knew that the whole phrase, if you build it, they'll come. I actually don't believe in that. You can build whatever you want, but you could just sit there and
past Mark Spencer, you're wrong.
And now I know why. Yep.
Yeah, and so even to now, we're probably not seeing the numbers we'd want to. But when people do see this, they sign it. It's a black and white situation.
Yeah, and it seems to me build it and they come might have worked more in the past, but now there's so many great things being built that it's hard to even realize they exist, let alone go to them.
Yeah.
And it's extremely noisy time, right? We want to be cognizant. Like, there's a lot going on in the world, and a lot of people have a lot of very existential worries about their life and livelihood and health.
Yeah, and it strikes me that when it comes to no pun intended, but when it comes to businesses and school strike, that if there's like a campaign and something they can jump on board with, then that those companies can publicly state, hey, just to let you know, we're such a good company that this is us showing that we're great because we're letting people go to this strike. How do you kind of, I guess, show that you're not doing greenwashing? I mean, granted, you're not going to discriminate about which companies sign up because they have to do the action of allowing people to go, even if they don't, have the most sustainable practices as a whole. And then it's up to their kind of community online to be like, excuse me, but why do you do this, that, and the other? Which is my favorite form of online activism at times, depending how I'm feeling. But how do you kind of distinguish yourself as not being part of greenwashing?
It's a really hard one. I think in the situation that we're in with Podcasters Declare, the environmental movement is not well known for good design and good marketing. There are some big organizations out there that do it really well, but by and large, it's grassroots movements of people who understand campaigning on a human level, but they might not be tech savvy, or they might not know how to use Adobe Photoshop or whatever. So there's this hurdle that if things look really, really good, people are suspicious of it. Luckily, because I pulled out all the stops for this, and I'm actually quite proud of this little campaign. We've had very little concerns about that. We have had some who just at face value dismissed the whole situation, but by and large, people are like, "Whoa, this looks so good, feels so good. What a great message!" Sign.
Yeah, it's interesting because I had. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, like, it is a concern. I think if things look too slick, in given the context in which they're in, there's an expectation. So like if it's a business setting, it's got to look slick. Otherwise, you don't trust it. If it's in a more human community grassroots movement, the opposite is true. Yeah. Yeah,
and I remember a discussion with Casey Whitelaw, who's the founder and CEO of Go Neutral. And he was talking about the branding of that and how he purposefully wanted to move away from the kind of go green style thing that we normally have seen in the past on environmental movements. And that was more so that he could bring on board people who normally are turned off by an overt, maybe they get cringy about anything that's too political, even though, we know it's all political. So, there is this kind of reputation for branding and marketing in the environmental movement being clunky, but also that has become a signal of authenticity in itself, I suppose. So it's great to hear that's changing.
Yeah, I think the one thing that many of these groups could really learn from is if you're trying to have conversations with people who aren't listening, you need to change the way you approach them. And Casey's done an incredibly good job. So one of his main target audiences are young tradies.
Yeah.
So like, or in their first couple of years of being an apprentice, young people overwhelmingly environmentally focused and climate conscious. Even the young tradies. So if you can buy a carbon offset and put it on your ute, right, and you can offset those points, that ticks that box for that young person, but can still have the ute and not be ostracized for buying like a Prius, for example.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of stuff going on there, which I find fascinating, and people like Casey are trying to go around.
And not having the bumper sticker that is like a big tree of life that doesn't go with their own personal brand, where they call themselves.
It's not green.
Yeah, Yeah. Well, so this is great conversation about that overall marketing and things like that. And obviously, I mean, I love the Podcasters Declare branding and everything. When you've gone into marketing Podcasters Declare, and by that I mean just communicating to podcasters out there that it exists and they should get on board, what have been the main things that you've been asking them to do? And actually, if anyone's listening who's a podcaster, what is your call to action for them?
So we've got it boiled down now to actually a really good kind of menu. Whereas at the start, it was definitely like we're trying to get a groundswell. So we're trying to like try a lot of stuff, throw a lot of, spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. But we kind of boiled it down to there's the signing of the open letter, which we've, as of 2 days ago, a really good supporter and an early collaborator on the project, a man named Brett DeHoyt, who has been in PR for nonprofits for decades in Melbourne. He suggested right at the start of this, we create a change.org petition. And we thought, yeah, change.org, that's what your auntie signs about shopping bags and turtles. And
there's
we're like,
great things and also really offbeat things on there.
And yeah, there's some stuff on change.org, like you don't control what comes after. So I signed, so to jump to the end here, we've got a change.org petition now as of 2 days ago. And I signed it yesterday, and up popped a stop Europeans importing kangaroos for meat into Europe. And I'm like, well, that's complicated. I don't know how I feel about
what
the
is
whole
the
thing.
Algorithm saying about Podcasters Declare if that's the next thing?
And I signed it from New Zealand. It was interesting. So we've now got the option of go to podcastersdeclare.com and sign our open letter. Or change.org, or do both, because in change.org is really easy to sign. So there's the signing. You can sign as a listener. You can sign as a podcast creator, podcaster yourself. And if you do that, we'll add your art to our mosaic, and you'll see this lovely big list of shows that have signed. And it's also a great source of discovery for climate shows.
Including nice. Climate Australia.
Yes. Always plugging your podcast, Lee. Yes. Perfect. We've got a couple other things people can do if they are podcasters themselves. We've got a little promo, 60-second promo that sort of describes the campaign in brief. And that's featuring voices of Dan Illich, past guest on Climate Australia, award-winning comedy writer, satirist. Also featuring Kate Taylor, who was the voice of BBC4. You're listening to BBC4 radio, and I can't do a good job, but she does. She was one of our voices. Stephen, I'm blanking on the names of the rest of the folks.
Lacey.
Stephen Lacey. Sorry, Stephen. I've been listening to his podcast for years, but he's generally the host and he throws it off to the guests to speak a lot more. But and then a great podcaster from Taiwan, a great podcaster from India. So we're showing in this little 60-second promo that this is a global campaign. It's really speaking to the fact that Apple has a 2030 carbon neutral plan, and yet they make it very hard to find climate podcasts. So you can run that on your show, or we have posters. As of today, you'll see going up in a city near you, especially if you're the one who puts them up, posters to very easily and quickly take you to podcastersdeclare.com to sign the open letter, available in 3 colors, because we're all about the branding and choice. And finally, the last action people can take is to chip in a little bit on the campaign if you've got a couple dollars lying around, because and I'm the one to say it because it's a lot easier when it's not going into your account to ask for money for this kind of stuff, because it has been Sean who's been paying for the tools, the hosting, things like our email newsletter software, all the stuff from the start. So he's been floating this boat, and we want to help him get back into the black, or at least out of the red as much.
Yeah, totally.
That's how people can help.
So then it's great that listeners are also involved in this, because I'm guessing that Apple Podcasts almost would care even more what listeners want than because they're not just going to one podcast or even creating one podcast. They're potentially, people who are going all over the place when they discover something that's in their wheelhouse.
Yeah. So we've got a breakdown. We've got podcast account is around 265 at this point, but listener count is 630. So there are so many more listeners, obviously, than podcasters. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. So you're absolutely right. There's, but we just, I think the struggle is to reach them.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah. But even if you are not an avid listener, you just care about a climate category, because maybe you might listen to podcasts more, then you should sign. You know.
Yeah.
So
at the moment, with categories, are you able to have more than one category?
You can select 3. The first category you choose determines the chart you go into, so you can see how well you're competing against the other people in your category, and that's your that's what really matters. But then your second and your third category, you're still available if you're looking through by category. Essentially, crate digging like you do at the record shop. You'll actually find stuff that is intersectional, and so it's Apple themselves in that ability are showing that their categories aren't perfect, and that shows can be multiple things and can be intersectional.
Yeah, because I suppose you want your primary category to be your primary audience as well, which potentially isn't climate change people. If you're making a podcast where you're like, I want to talk to people within my sector in design, for instance, or I want to talk to people who may not naturally think about climate change, but they're into like satire and comedy.
Yep.
So it becomes a really valuable secondary category for those people. Then if you have people who want that.
There's a podcast out there at the moment, and there's a couple of comedians, and they're talking about climate stuff. Again, it's another one of those, the Casey Whitelaw thing. It's like you're going around the issue in a different way. And I think a lot of people turned off by the potential doom and gloom of, where we're headed. But I think humor, like you say, if you're searching through humor and you end up listening to something that makes you laugh and then it educates you as well, like, how good's that double whammy?
Yeah, you happen to connect with an audience that's there for a laugh and then gets a side of some climate action they can take.
Yeah.
Yep. Because it's being covered in the content. It's not like 3 years ago where if you were talking about climate, all you were doing was talking about climate. Now, climate effects and climate impacts are just part of everyday life experiences, and they're part of decisions like transport and food production. And so a great example would be Irrational Fear. Again, previous guest Dan Illich, his show, which they gave an Australian podcast award to, so it's not just me that's a fan.
Not just you at all.
Not just me. There's many shows I'm the only fan.
You on many accounts.
That's right. Yes, me and Sock Puppets 1, 2, 3. His show is Category 1 comedy. Of course, it's a comedy show. Category 2 is news, because they have people on like Zali Steggall, public figures, politicians. And then Category 3 is currently blank, and I think he's holding it as a placeholder for climate, because they talk about climate 30, 40, 50% of the time.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of climate folks out there who I've introduced Irrational Fear to because they care about climate, damn it. They don't want to listen to chuckle people talk about comedy stuff. The world's on fire. But Irrational Fear is the thing that they need to sustain themselves, and that they need to be able to share with their friends and family, chuck on a road trip.
And also those of us who are the climate category fans, who would likely be searching in that way, I find myself always searching for things where I'm like, oh, Irrational Fear, so I can recommend this to my friend who's not really into climate, but they really like political satire. Or I can be like, oh, Heaps Better by Greenpeace, supported by Greenpeace, like, oh, that's for my friend who's, really into those sorts of like chat shows between friends and everyday stuff, but doesn't know where to start. So it kind of allows a different avenue. And this is something I'm just realizing right now while I'm talking to you. It allows a different avenue as well for the choir that you preach to like preach to their various, talk to their various circles. Yeah. Various
relevant hymn sheets to sing from that aren't the same doomerism, like that makes climate conversations more relevant to your target audience.
Yeah.
And give you more relevant things.
I'm constantly trying to be like, oh, you like this. You should read this. Or how about you listen to this? Or maybe you'll like this series. It's a bit like this, but also climate change is in there.
Because what you said there of like, there's nothing stopping you from suggesting Heaps Better to someone right now. But right now, that suggestion, that recommendation,
I have to already know that exists.
You have to already know it exists. And then once they've listened to it and loved it, how do they find more?
Yeah. Yeah, if they're like, oh, maybe I need to listen to more climate podcasts.
And
wouldn't it be great for the climate category?
Yeah, because like the same thing will happen with that change.org situation. You fill in one thing and it's like, hey, we should get more white fences in my town. Something ridiculous that, local jobbers just decided about that.
Yeah.
I think we should probably touch on like what we think this can achieve after we get a category.
Well, I was just going to ask whether there's been any changes that you can see from, for instance, the true crime category coming about as opposed to before there was one.
Yeah, so Mark has a bit more insight into the industry than I do, but he told me a while back that since true crime's been added as a category, you can track that there's 40,000 true crime shows. And that's
no, sorry, that was a few days ago. There's probably 42 or 43,000 by now, Sean. There's new true crime shows every single day.
Yeah. And that just means that you'll open up an app and it'll say, hey, you listen to this thing. This is true crime. You want to listen to this thing too. And I was like fascinated about this. Like I've listened to a bunch of stuff like Serial, expose into like, wrongful, offenses or the jailing of someone who didn't actually deserve it. And I wanted to figure out if a true crime's like podcast had ever solved a crime. It didn't take long, a quick little Google, and there was like this serial killer in Colorado. It's like a 1980 murder that happened and they couldn't figure out who did it. And this true crime podcast had a listener hear about it, and apparently their DNA solved the crime.
Wow.
And I just think if we had 40,000 climate-esque shows and people are talking about solutions and local ideas and political, concepts, maybe we could slow this thing
solve climate change with one podcast listener.
Imagine that.
Or I don't think it's naive to think there might be social enterprises or here's a little bit of forest that got saved from logging because it was indefensible as soon as anyone actually heard the facts behind it, or here's some council bylaw that got reversed, or God forbid Victoria's state EV tax gets overturned because it's So podcasting is like sunlight, and sunlight's the best disinfectant, and a lot of the climate crisis issues, writ small, are just local graft and corruption. And podcasting is great for that.
Yeah. And I suppose that we're just talking about the ripple effects that you can see and measure, but you obviously will never know and can only assume that there's lots of ripple effects in everybody's ways of engaging with each other and living and voting and doing business and, making decisions about spending or whatever that you won't be able to hear and see necessarily. Or you might, because I think listeners of podcasts love to write in if they have that interaction with a host, or they love to give feedback about what it's actually meant for them or how it fits into their daily life. I'm just wondering, with the example you've given about the number of true crime podcasts that have been made, is that true crime podcasts that were existing that then categorized themselves as true crime because there was a category? Or is that people deciding to make a true crime podcast because there's now a category? Or is that because there's a category, they become more popular, therefore people who are trying to jump on the bandwagon of where they can get listeners are more likely to go in that direction when they're deciding between concepts? Like, I know that's a big question. It's probably hard to know.
Wonderful question, Lee. It's the answer is yes to all three. That definitely at the start, when the category was created, there was a couple thousand shows that took on that category that realized that, oh yes, this is what we are. You've made it. We can now properly label and identify ourselves. And then we've seen an explosion in new shows, and then an explosion in, there's a small number of very well-known blockbuster true crime shows, and then you get the 1,000,001 flowers blooming of, we want that success, yes please, and tag-alongs, and there's nothing wrong with that. And you ended up, like I heard yesterday, a trailer for a true crime show that is it's like not a mockumentary, but it's like about a TV show about a true crime where the lead actress is also a murderer. And this is like done as an audio fiction series. So it's combining the fact that there's now, golden age radio dramas are back, and that it's a fiction show about true crime, and it's a meta narrative. And it's like, as soon as the space, people get creative, right? But
they do.
Am I wrong, Sean, that creativity needs boundaries and creativity needs a space in which to create itself? Otherwise,
is he wrong, Sean?
He is not. There's nothing worse than being given a blank canvas and say, make something good, please. It just doesn't work.
Yeah.
Welcome to climate podcasting at the moment.
I think we are seeing a lot of people, when it comes to complex issues they feel powerless about, whether it's pandemic or climate crisis, actually proactively seeking out things. So, making something searchable does make a lot of sense when there's a lot of people searching for answers.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It makes sense to us. Does anyone have any questions from your audience on
this isn't a question, but Zach Ward says, love Climate Australia, smiley face. So just to pump my own tires, I thought I'd read that out. What we might do is we might go to credits and then come back and do like a bit of a just chatting where we encourage a few more questions from the audience. And then hopefully, I've got a bunch more, but hopefully Zach and Sarah, who are big fans, and others can think of your questions. If you are watching on YouTube, Facebook, or in the home of Climate Australia, Simpatico TV, please type out your questions in the chat, and feel free to ask lots of big and small questions. If we don't know, we'll just say that. So that's the good thing. No pretending here. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Mark and Sean, for coming along and telling us about Podcasters Declare, the idea behind it, and what you're doing. Would you like to do a last plug for a call to action before we go to credits?
Apple has no climate category, but you can do something about it. Sign our open letter at podcastersdeclare.com.
Do it. And do it by the 15th?
Do it today.
Today.
Do it right now.
Whenever you're listening to this, do it now.
Do it now.
Right now. Yeah, don't listen to us, just go.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We'll go to credits and we'll be back soon for a bit of a Q&A in Just Chatting. Twitter retweet to everyone to let them know to get in here, ask their questions. Hey, welcome back. We're actually back on screen just so you can hear. This is more of a casual, just chatting part of our episode, so you are welcome to do some shout outs online. I'm actually just going to Twitter right now, and I'm just going to remind everyone to come along and ask questions.
Guys, if you thought we were loose before, you ain't seen nothing yet.
Yeah, go wild. It's just chatting time.
Just before we do that, we should say big ups to Eve and Manit, who aren't here. They're two other team members that help out heaps. Eve did all the illustrations. Amazing work. She does some. I think it's Comics for Climate or something like that, Mark.
Yep.
But she's been.
Yeah.
Anyway, fantastic stuff. And then Manit's joined us sort of recently, and she's been bringing lots of great ideas to the table about, comms ideas and where we can get the message out and stuff. So, yeah, shout out to those two.
Yeah, definitely.
Cheers, Eve.
And there's more information on the whole team on the website as well. Definitely check that out because it's a big community that you're trying to reach. One question I had for you is, obviously, through Climactic Collective, you've got quite good reach when it comes to people making climate podcasts in Australia. How are you connecting with the US and some of these other countries that have climate podcasters?
yeah, we reached out to the people who were making climate podcasts in those other places. It helped that I was already a fan of most of them. I've already had that kind of parasocial relationship of like, despite forgetting Stephen Lacey's surname earlier, it was just a brain fart. I've been listening to Steve specifically for years. So when I reached out, I was like, hey, Stephen, you don't know me. I'll acknowledge that, but I've heard your voice for hundreds of hours, and I feel like, you're my best friend and all. So this is a very exciting thing, and you'll be all about it. So you on board? And he's like, yeah, sure. So we jumped on a call, and it was the coolest moment of my life, meeting some of my heroes. And then that promo that we made, I just sent out to, we picked the 5 best people from 5 different corners of the earth, and I wrote up my first kind of script for people to read, and I sent it to my heroes. And they recorded it within 48 hours and sent it back to me. Then I cut the promo and died from the stress of that experience.
You're like, wow, my words coming out of their mouths in that voice I've been listening.
100%.
And then they corrected me on some things and made it much better. It's like my words plus their intelligence. Yeah.
True to form, like the audio quality was exceptional. And then I had to make a video out of it. I was just like, we gotta I don't know, elevate this a bit more to get to new eyeballs, I suppose. So we had a video to go with it, and I think they're all very proud of it because they've been sharing it like crazy. Especially Emily, her and Ghost Island
over in Taiwan, Ghost Island Media. Big shout out to them; they're amazing. Can't wait to meet them in person one day.
They're keen
Friends
for this
in Taiwan.
That's awesome, and I know that Doug Parsons was telling me that he's signed up. Obviously, he's also got a climate adaptation show here in Simpatico, which is also a podcast.
America Adapts, yeah. One of the OG climate podcasts.
Yes, you're a long-time listener. Big fan. Yeah, so basically, I suppose a lot of their audience of Apple Podcasts is in the US as well as creators. Or is that just an assumption I'm making because that seems to be the way with lots of tech and social media?
Yeah, the biggest podcast listening audience is in the States, but doesn't really matter. Podcast medium is global, and it's sure coming on fast. Like the year-on-year growth in other countries is exceeding that of the States. So yeah, sure, like the US reached critical mass first. But it is coming along huge in India and Indonesia, and here in New Zealand, it's finally catching on. I know you all really care about what happens in New Zealand, but
I do care about what happens in New Zealand. So also for anyone who's met Mark on
my aunt started
Australia.
listening to podcasts. It's been a huge thing for the numbers here. It's just taken off.
Well, when you look at the proportion of the whole population, you've got a big share there, percentage-wise. It's huge. So those who don't know, Mark is actually over in New Zealand now. In New Zealand, are there many podcasters that you're reaching out to there that might become part of the Climactic Collective as well as this?
Yeah, it's cool to talk about this and also say it kind of publicly rather than kind of I've been having some great conversations with some great climate podcasters over here. There's some shows that have been going for a little while, very niche, like speaking to the New Zealand audience. But New Zealand has a hell of a good story to tell on climate change preparation. We have a National Climate Council that is actually working on just all the stuff we always wish happens in Australia is happening here. Just I think the general public aren't really aware of the policy sausage making that's going on in the background. So it's really cool that stuff.co.nz, which is one of the biggest media outlets in the country, it's a bunch of the regional and local papers all got together and funded this really good online platform called Stuff. It started off being kind of popcorn and easy to digest news, but it's now become a serious news outlet and the biggest in the country. They have a climate change section. They have a climate change editor. And in a couple weeks, we're having a coffee, and I'm going to pitch them on joining Climactic. So I'll see how that goes.
Yeah, and I suppose other media organisations that have climate and environment, at least, categories would be like Guardian Australia. And I saw recently they were actually advertising for podcast producers even, or audio producers.
So there's some jobs going in podcast department at Guardian Australia. So if any of the people listening are obviously podcast makers or podcast fans, know that there's some good jobs going out there.
Yeah, so I suppose like media organizations are often coming up against this categorization thing as well. And if there's an environment category, there'll be like a science and technology, maybe environment separate or part of that, and health separate or part of that. And then climate, if at all, will be within kind of this environment and sustainability area, rather than, when they have business categories, sport categories, we see all of these things kind of intersecting. Do you think that potentially they should have multiple category streams for their news as well?
Interesting. Sean and I we might have some interesting things to say here. One interesting piece of feedback we got on this campaign was from someone who's worked in journalism for decades, and she runs one of the biggest climate podcasts out there. And she said that, any institution, any news outlet that creates a vertical or creates a category, its own space for climate coverage, hasn't resulted in increased readership or visibility into climate topics. It kind of creates like a climate ghetto. And then like people who, it only appeals to people who already have an interest in climate, and they were finding that coverage anyway. So it's really cool to highlight that the Podcasters Declare side with podcasting, what we're doing isn't going to create a silo where climate becomes less visible to people who don't care, but actually it becomes more because of the fact you can have three categories, and it does embrace intersectionality. But I think the biggest problem with news coverage isn't that there isn't a dedicated climate section, but that the climate implications or the climate content of what they're talking about isn't actually said. It's left out.
Yeah.
If they just covered a sport topic, hey, it was 50 degrees yesterday in Sydney, thank God not yet, but 40 degrees in Parramatta.
Melbourne tennis and the heat waves, and this is becoming
precisely.
And I suppose with Climate Council, we saw that kind of big push in the press with the sports stars, obviously David Pocock, but a bunch of other sports stars kind of going hand in hand with that report they put out about what that means. And I really liked that, because I think I thought of it that way, like sports reporting is very much not a place where you see climate discussed beyond, you don't actually see it. You see weather discussed potentially if it calls off a game, but not really.
Yeah, and I know plenty of my friends crazy about sport, and they do it to get away from everyday life. And so to be confronted with extra stuff that's a bit too heavy, they don't like it so much. But I had been to a couple of talks where climate scientists was talking about the effect of climate on sport. And so I think that pricked up a few ears, because it's like, well, it's costing millions of dollars to keep the grass alive. And and also the heat waves will cause like health issues. And if you like watching sport outside, in the future, you may not be able to. Yeah,
for sure. And then also beyond professional athletes, there's also children taking part in sport, and 100%. On the Saturday, and the heat stroke and all these other things having to be dealt with. One thing that we were discussing when it comes to declaring, in terms of Comms Declare, they have this, they're basically asking people to sign on to be like, I won't do PR and marketing for fossil fuel companies and things like that. After you've done this open letter to Apple, are you going to keep campaigning for that change if it doesn't happen? And if it does happen, will you be continuing with other campaigns, and what sort of things were you thinking for the future?
It doesn't end. Yeah, either way. If Apple, what we're asking for is Apple on Earth Day, April 22nd, to announce if it'll take time, of course, to organize the code change and prepare the industry and tell everyone, but we're not unrealistic the fact that they're going to add a climate category on Earth Day, but an announcement on Earth Day would be pretty good to go along with all the other stuff they do that's pro-climate. This is not, we're not yelling in the face of Pharaoh here. Like Apple are a good citizen as a corporation in terms of climate action. So we're just surprised they haven't done this obvious thing left on the side. So it's
you're
nice
even offering them, a day to market it around. That's pretty cool.
Here's the PR campaign, Apple. Take it and go. So if they say no, we'll reconvene and reassess and maybe take it elsewhere. There are other directories out there that would quite like to beat Apple to the punch.
Yeah, and I suppose that's the other thing that you can take to competitors is say, this is our podcasts. Most of them also are on your platform, not just Apple. Apple has given no response or this response. Are you willing to look like the good guy here? It does show that you've got this marketing and PR mindset because that, and using that strategically for good, not evil. Because
we're here to be good, but also get stuff done.
Yeah, because you can go into businesses being like, this is a legitimately good thing you can do, that we know you can do, and also this is how you can let everyone know how good you are at the same time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I can already see the headline now. Apple said no. Will Spotify sign now? We could keep this train rolling.
Yeah, yeah. And do you think that Biden's election has changed the will for these sorts of things?
Honestly, I personally haven't thought much about it. I've been excited about the prospect as living in Australia until a couple of weeks ago, and now being back in New Zealand where I'm from, despite the American accent. I've been very excited about the chance to not think about America for a couple months. It's been very nice.
How nice has it been on Twitter without Trump around? Even saying his name, I feel like spitting it out again because I haven't said it for ages. I've just got a question from Mike who says, I don't know if you've mentioned this, but does Spotify actually recognize the importance of this category? And, do you have any idea if they already have been approached?
So Spotify bought a little company named Gimlet Media 2 years ago, which is a very big acquisition. They spent hundreds of millions of dollars on it. Gimlet Media co-founder is a man named Alex Bloomberg. Alex Bloomberg is the co-host on a show called How to Save a Planet, co-hosted by Ayanna Pressley. And it is one of the most loud, honest, engaging climate shows out there that is really holding the feet to the fire of other podcasters on climate action. And I think if Apple don't take it seriously, then they're risking losing one of their biggest talents.
Yeah. And with that podcast, do you know how it was categorized within
their society and culture, along with Joe Rogan, Jordan Peterson?
I was just looking at this, that there's in Spotify, they've got a list of their categories. The third category is Joe Rogan, next to stories and podcast playlists.
Rogan is a category now. He's not a man. Unto himself.
Isn't that
what
bonkers?
An intersectional category? Because his toxicity is kind of intersectional and it touches everything.
It gets all the Joes and all the Rogans in one place.
Here's the thing: if they can just do that flippantly for something, and it's clearly financially incentivized. Like, come on.
Yeah. Mike just said that the Simpatico podcast is under society and culture as well.
You go to where the people are, right? Yep.
We live in a society.
Yeah, I can see why in the current categories that's the best place, but that's a sign of a failing of the category, not of anyone who uses it.
Yeah.
So here's a funny little thing, maybe a little anecdote. So we've got a podcast for Podcasters Declare called Podcasters Declare, and we've been collecting up voicemails people have been sending us why they're signing and things like the promo. And we've submitted this show to Apple Podcasts. And what category should that go in? We've chosen true crime. Because
yes.
and now, we've already been in touch through Apple's podcast support team. It's a requirement by being listed in Apple Podcasts that you choose the right category that reflects your content. So the question now is, we're going to send a help request and be like, kindly advise us a better category than true
Yeah.
crime for this, because unless we have a climate category, the true crime is you guys ignoring this.
Zing!
Mhm.
I really think there is such a good opening for true climate crime podcasts as well, because there's a lot of stories about corruption, things being covered up, communities being
land.
ignored. Yeah, so maybe we just need to flood the true crime category with true climate crime.
Yeah, you're onto something.
I mean, that would be a good thing to do anyway, even if they have a climate category.
I would love to see.
It takes a term for the activist. If we knock on the front door so long we get tired and start looking for ways to tunnel under the walls, we'll just get a bunch of climate podcasts to recategorize themselves as true crime and say, take us down or add a category.
Yeah, and if you're going to take us down, we're going to make a stink.
That's right.
Yeah. Mike is saying, yes, true crime. So clearly, I don't know, maybe Mike's going right now to recategorize our Simpatico podcast as true crime. See what happens.
I would love to listen to a podcast that was like, the three categories. You got true crime, climate, politics,
yes.
Something super hard-hitting journalism of the underbelly of lobbying and indigenous displacement, like Rio Tinto.
I mean, that's exactly what I was going to say. Look at all the true crime happening. I mean, for a long, long time when it comes to sacred sites by fossil fuel companies.
Disgusting, absolutely deplorable. Yeah.
And it's only really in the last couple of years that it's bursting the bubble and getting out into audiences that may not be aware, but obviously that's been happening for a long time and the voices have been raised and not heard. Mike says, as a host of 2 podcasts, I appreciate that you all are doing this.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate you, man.
Mike.
Yeah, so I think we're going to...
It has been so lovely getting people's voicemails in, because there's been plenty of times, because we have not heard anything back from Apple at this point. We have gone through proper official and back channels.
We did hear someone say we have a nice website.
Indeed, the Apple PR team.
They're right. That's correct. Yeah. You do.
But that's not the answer we want. I don't care.
Nothing on content yet. Just.
I mean, they'd probably be less worried if you had a really crappy website with a bunch of word art. So.
That's probably true. Yeah.
Do you find this design threatening? You should.
So good.
Well, Mike
it's
says,
been amazing to get the voicemails from people. I'll just say that podcasting already is a lonely thing, and it's great to get that feedback from listeners and actually getting that feedback from podcasters that hey, thanks. Feels like you've got our backs. We feel seen. And I'm like, yeah, we're right there with you. That's exactly where we were. So
and obviously, you made the collective because you recognised it's very solo. Apart from making it easier to discover climate content, it also brought together creators. But Podcasters Declare is another thing that creators can connect around, and actually looking through your list of declared podcasts is a really cool way for me to discover climate content. In fact, it's the only way currently that I can discover what climate content is on Apple Podcasts. So you're already doing a service. Mike reiterates it is a nice website and says, yeah, what we're all thinking, which is the biggest problem facing humanity, should have a category on Apple. Indeed.
Yes, it should.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for your time today. We appreciate you. Drop the mic into a pillow laid off camera, because I know you podcasters are very careful with your tech. Just a little drop of the mic. Thank you both so much. And
thank you, Lee.
All the best with the rest of the campaign. If you're listening, if you're watching this back, go sign it now. Go to podcastersdeclare.com, see what's happening, whatever it is, get on board. Listener, podcaster, whoever you are.
That's ironic. I tap my watch and it brings up a Radiolab episode.
There you go. Awesome.
Thank you so much, Lee.
Thanks,
Thank
Lee.
you. I'll let you both go, and look forward to seeing the rest of the campaign.
Fingers crossed. Bye.
Thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in, whether you're on YouTube or Facebook or here on Simpatico TV. I will be back in weeks to come with more episodes for you about climate problems and solutions. And yes, it is intersectional, as we've been mentioning. So we'll be talking from industry, science, policy perspectives. So please stay tuned, and thanks for watching. Bye now.